Deep within the chapel of Hauska Castle, the air hangs still, laced with the faint scent of aged lime and forgotten incense. Faded frescoes climb the walls, figures in eternal prayer, their eyes hollow under arched brows, fingers clasped in rigid supplication. The floor beneath, a mosaic of uneven stone slabs, bears faint scratches, as if etched by unseen hands over centuries. Shafts of muted light filter through narrow slits, casting elongated shadows that pool like ink in the corners. A single wooden crucifix looms above the altar, its surface worn smooth, the figure upon it bowed in silent endurance. Yet this chapel was not built to welcome the faithful. It seals something below. Was it constructed to contain a void, or to invite one? Stay with us, and see if the stones whisper their answer. Chapter 1. The Foundation Choice. Wind cuts across the barren hilltop in the dense Bohemian forests, where the ground gives way to a jagged fissure, limestone cracked open like a wound that refuses to heal. Torches flicker in the hands of scouts sent ahead in the mid-13th century, their flames bend inward, as if drawn by something below. The air carries a faint, acrid warmth rising from the depths, and stones dropped into the void yield no echo, only silence. Workers gathered at the edge hesitate, ropes coiled unused, eyes fixed on the blackness that seems to pulse faintly in the daylight. Why commit to foundations here, when flatter, watered land lies mere kilometers away, nearer to trade paths and villages? The choice originated earlier, in the ambitions of an expanding kingdom. Records trace the site back to a wooden fortification from the late 9th century, raised around 878 by Prince Slavomir of the Sov tribe for his son Hauska, a fleeting outpost soon lost to time. But the decisive order came during the reign of Ottokar II of Bohemia, from 1253 onward, as he consolidated royal domains stretching across forests and swamps. Hauska was envisioned as an administrative seat, a distant ledger point for managing estates, mirroring the grander Bezdes castle built concurrently by the same royal workshops. Yet consequences emerged from the outset. The fissure, described in later chronicles as a karst formation, deep and unstable, demanded immediate attention. Labor diverted to probing and covering it, delaying walls and towers. By 1278, as Ottokar met defeat and death at Marchfeld, the castle stood partially realized, its core already skewed toward containment rather than command. One rational account frames the pit as a natural sinkhole, typical of the region's limestone bedrock, a geological accident, not anomaly. Probes in subsequent centuries lowered ropes exceeding 100 meters without striking bottom, and gases might explain fleeting visions or unease among early visitors. But the contradiction lingers in omissions. Why do the earliest building directives, preserved in fragments, prioritize the chapel's placement directly over the hole before completing habitable quarters? And why the persistent legend of a condemned prisoner, offered pardon for dissent, lowered briefly, then hauled up screaming, hair whitened, raving of winged forms and half-human shapes below, only to die days later babbling of horrors unseen? The chain begins here. Select an impractical hill for oversight, encounter an unyielding void, and the structure bends to accommodate it. Silence in archives follows. Dates align, yet details of the pit's exploration vanish, leaving only echoes. Over 350 years separated the ancient tribal fort from Ottokar's mandate. The main tower would rise to 20 meters, walls 2 meters thick in places. The chapel floor, layered with slabs up to 1 meter deep, spans roughly 10 square meters above the sealed fissure. Construction spanned at least 25 years, from mid-1250s to late 1270s, with gaps in labor records hinting at interruptions, perhaps fear, perhaps cost. No confirmed deaths in official tallies, yet folklore insists on at least one from that first descent. Moral discomfort settles quietly. Pardons dangled over peril, lives weighed against curiosity. A withheld explanation hovers. Did royal surveyors know the depth before committing stone? The unease compounds. Build to administer land, but first administer the land's refusal to be tamed. And so the decision locks in, inevitable from the moment the site was chosen, not for what it offered above, but for what it concealed below. Chapter 2. The King's Directive. A royal courier pushes through the mud of a forest track in the late 1260s, parchment sealed with wax bearing the mark of Premissel Ottokar II. Rain lashes the trees as he reaches the hilltop site. Builders cluster around fires, their progress stalled by the stubborn fissure below. The orders are clear. Raise walls swiftly, vault the chapel first, establish an administrative seat. No delays for comforts or conveniences. What pressing need justified such haste in a realm already stretched by borders and ambitions? Ottokar II's rule, spanning 1253 to 1278, saw Bohemia swell with conquests and consolidations. Royal estates sprawled across forests, requiring oversight beyond Prague's reach. Hauska emerged alongside Bezdez, both crafted by the same workshops, nearly simultaneously, as a ledger point for distant holdings, a place to tally rents and resolve disputes without the king's constant presence. Yet the directives skewed priorities. No provision for a kitchen in the initial layout, water reliant on cisterns alone, no well sunk despite limestone's promise, defenses oriented inward, arrow slits gazing toward the courtyard rather than outward threats. Supplies assumed from afar, inhabitants transient, administrators, not residents. Consequences unfolded quietly. Upon Ottokar's death in battle at Marchfeld in 1278, the castle passed incomplete in spirit, its royal ties loosening. By 1316, records show it under Heinrich Berke of Duba, the first of many noble transfers. Archives from the era note practical omissions. No inventories of hearths or storerooms, only structural mandates. Rationally, this reflected efficient governance. A remote hub for estate management, remoteness itself a safeguard against casual interference, mirroring Bezdez's role before it overshadowed Hauska. Costs deferred to functionality over luxury suited a king funding multiple fortresses. But the contradiction endures in silence. Why forego a reliable water source in a land of springs, leaving reliance on rain in cisterns that could fail in drought? Why inward defenses for an administrative outpost, when external foes loomed larger than internal ones? The chain forms. Decree haste for control, sacrifice habitability, and the site drifts from purpose, inviting neglect and reinterpretation. Over 25 years marked the core construction. From the mid-1260s to late 1270s, the courtyard spans roughly 30 by 20 meters. Walls rise 10 to 15 meters in places, 2 meters thick. The chapel vault covers 100 square meters above the sealed void. Ownership shifted at least 8 times in the first 400 years post-build. No permanent garrison recorded until later eras. Gaps in royal visits span decades, with Ottokar himself likely never residing. A withheld explanation stirs. Did surveyors foresee the impracticalities yet proceed? Moral discomfort lingers in the labor. Workers hauled stone uphill, far from villages, for a structure half-suited to life. Quiet contradiction builds. Intended for administration, yet designed as if anticipating threats from within its own foundations. Thus the decision embeds itself, rendering reversal unthinkable. not a fortress for defense, nor a home for dwelling, but a marker of control that, in its compromises, ensured its own isolation. Chapter 3. Sealing the Chapel. Masons' hammers ring out in the dim light of 1270, layering heavy stone slabs over the fissure in deliberate silence. One worker pauses, ear pressed to the fresh floor, claiming a low rumble rises from below, like distant thunder trapped underground. Others dismiss it as settling earth, yet the pace quickens. The chapel's foundations take precedence over all else. Why elevate the sacred here, directly above the site's deepest instability, when habitable spaces remain unfinished? The decision crystallized amid Ottokar II's building campaign: construct a Gothic chapel as the castle's core, dedicated to Archangel Michael, victor over infernal forces. Ribbed vaults soared overhead, arrow slits angled curiously toward the courtyard, frescoes begun in outlines, scenes of judgment, crucifixion, and strangely, a left-handed centaur archer, bow drawn in defiance of convention. The pit, capped with plates up to a meter thick, became the altar's foundation, sanctity imposed on void. Consequences settled in layers. The chapel, completed by the 1280s, anchored the structure, yet diverted resources from practical wings. No kitchen yet, water cisterns secondary. By 1291, the castle passed to lesser nobles, its royal phase brief, the sealed space already whispering through cracks. Rationally, medieval builders often placed chapels centrally for symbolic dominion over untamed land, invoking divine protection against natural perils. A karst sinkhole, prone to collapse, rationalized as geological quirk. Frescoes depicting struggle between good and evil were commonplace allegory, the centaur perhaps a moral warning against pagan holdovers. But the contradiction persists in design choices. Arrow slits and defenses oriented inward, as if guarding against eruption from the heart rather than invasion from without. Why adorn a house of worship with hybrid beasts and demonic undertones, when purity might better consecrate unstable ground? The chain binds tighter. Prioritize seal through faith, embed anomalies in stone, and the structure invites eternal doubt. Over 50 years spanned from initial orders in the 1250s to fresco completion around 1330–1400. The chapel spans 2 stories, vaulted ceiling reaching 10 meters. Walls bear frescoes across 50 square meters. Slabs sealing the pit measure 1 to 2 meters thick. Probes in later centuries dropped lines 30 to 50 meters without bottom. Construction gaps of 10 to 20 years hint at hesitations. No recorded deaths in archives, yet legends tally 3 prisoners lost to early descents. A withheld explanation shadows the plans. Did masons hear more than wind? Moral discomfort stirs in the haste. Lives risked for a floor that still flexes faintly underfoot in reports. Quiet contradiction lingers. Consecrated ground achieved, yet sounds of scratching persist in accounts, as if the seal holds only the question, not the answer. And so the choice embeds inevitability. Not a chapel for prayer alone, but a lid on unrest, ensuring that whatever lies below remains both contained and perpetually suspected. Chapter 4. Renaissance Revisions. Dust rises in slow clouds through the shafts of afternoon light in 1584, as stonemasons chip away at the Gothic walls of Hauska. Scaffolding creaks around the courtyard. One artisan balances precariously, carving an elaborate frame for a window that will never hold glass, only blank stone behind it. Below, the overseer consults faded plans, voice low as he debates with the patron. Add elegance, soften the fortress lines, yet preserve what already stands. Why undertake costly embellishment on a structure so stubbornly impractical, when abandonment might have been simpler. The decision belonged to the Burka of Duba family, holders since at least 1503, who chose to reshape Hauska in the Renaissance spirit sweeping Bohemian nobility. Between 1584 and 1590, vaults were refined with delicate ribbing, faded Gothic frescoes retouched or overlaid, fake windows multiplied along the facades, ornate Renaissance arches and pediments painted in trompe-l'oeil to suggest openings where none existed. The chapel retained its primacy, the sealed floor untouched beneath new layers of lime wash. Consequences accumulated without drama. The renovations extended the castle's lifespan as a noble seat, yet deepened its peculiarities. No new kitchen added, water supply still dependent on cisterns, defenses unchanged in their inward gaze. By 1620 the Burka's line faltered, ownership drifted through marriages and debts, the refreshed walls witnessing only occasional residents. Rationally, the changes followed a wider trend. Nobles across the Habsburg lands updating medieval fortresses into mannered residences, illusionistic windows a fashionable device to imply grandeur without the expense or vulnerability of real ones. Prestige demanded visibility, even in remote forests. But the contradiction sits quietly in the persistence of anomalies. Why retain and even multiply fake windows when the surrounding landscape offered genuine panoramic views? Why invest in decorative frames facing outward, yet leave arrow slits still trained on the courtyard and chapel, as if the thread remained internal, not external? The chain hardens, revise for beauty, yet refuse to correct function, and the castle becomes more ornament than home, its mysteries polished rather than resolved. Over 300 years had passed since the original build when renovations began in 1584. The program lasted roughly 6 to 10 years. Fake windows number at least 12 across the main facade. Painted trompe-l'oeil details span 40 square meters. Costs, though unrecorded precisely, likely exceeded 2,000–3,000 Rhenish guilders. Sums noted in comparable estates. Ownership under the Burkas endured 117 years before transfer. Gaps between documented visits stretch 20 to 30 years at a time. No structural deaths recorded, yet workers' accounts later mention unexplained falls from scaffolding. A withheld explanation drifts through the ledgers. Did the Burkas deliberately avoid altering the chapel floor or inward defenses? Moral discomfort settles in the expenditure. Resources poured into illusion while habitability lagged. Quiet contradiction endures. The castle emerges more elegant, yet no less estranged from ordinary life, its refreshed surfaces only sharpening the questions etched in older stone. Thus the choice seals another link. Not to inhabit fully, nor to abandon, but to adorn the unresolved, ensuring that Hauska would endure less as a residence than as an enigma in finer clothing. Chapter 5. The Poet's Night. A single oil lamp burns low in an upper chamber on the night of October 22, 1836. Karel Heinrich Macha, wrapped in a traveling cloak, sits at a rough table, quill moving swiftly across paper as wind rattles the narrow slits. The castle lies empty around him, floors creaking faintly, shadows pooling in corners untouched by renovation. Hours pass. His breathing quickens. In the letter he will seal at dawn, he describes visions. Vast crowds in grotesque costumes, faces hidden behind painted masks, driven blindly through streets by unseen monsters, all beneath a sky he dates precisely, 2006. What draws a young romantic poet to spend a solitary autumn night in a place already half abandoned to silence? Macha, then 25, wandered Bohemia seeking inspiration in its wilder corners. Hauska appealed for its isolation. 47 kilometers north of Prague, reachable only by forest paths, and its reputation as a site untouched by crowds. He arrived unannounced, requested shelter for one night, and was granted it by the caretaker. No record shows prior arrangement. The visit appears impulsive, driven by curiosity about a castle whispered to unsettle even locals. Consequences unfolded quietly but lastingly. The letter to his friend Eduard Hindle, written immediately after, details the vision with unsettling precision. People in clown-like attire, dark glasses obscuring eyes, propelled by forces they cannot see, imagery that later readers would link to automobiles, modern anonymity, even totalitarianism. Macha died days later in Litomeris, aged 26, never returning. The account, published posthumously, attached itself indelibly to Hauska, shifting its aura from administrative relic to portal of foresight. Rationally, the episode fits the romantic temperament, isolation, fatigue, and the suggestive power of an ancient, empty fortress combined to spark hallucination or creative exaggeration. Macha's feverish state, possibly the onset of the illness that killed him, could explain vivid dreams framed as prophecy. Details like 2006 might reflect subconscious arithmetic from the current year, or simple coincidence. But the contradiction rests in specificity. Descriptions of wheeled vehicles without horses, crowds in uniform strangeness, sunglasses, loud mechanical noise, all absent from 1836 experience yet eerily resonant with 20th century life. Why date the vision exactly 170 years ahead? Why describe monsters hurting the blind when no such folklore attached to Hauska before his visit? The chain extends. One night's shelter granted, one letter dispatched, and the castle gains a layer of modern dread it cannot shed. Over 558 years separated the original construction from Macha's arrival. He spent exactly one documented night within the walls. The letter runs to roughly 600 words. The vision occupies less than a page yet dominates subsequent accounts. Ownership at the time remained with the Kunik family, who recorded no other literary visitors in that decade. Gaps between attested occupations stretched 10 to 15 years. No deaths tied directly to the chamber, yet Macha perished 12 days later, fever reported sudden and severe. A withheld explanation lingers in the caretaker's silence, no journal records reaction to the poet's agitation. Moral discomfort surfaces in the casual permission. A young man, alone, granted entry to a vast empty structure with no questions asked. Quiet contradiction persists. Inspiration sought in solitude yields not beauty alone, but a glimpse so precise it unsettles those who read it centuries later. Thus the decision, harmless hospitality on an autumn evening, links irrevocably into the next. Invite the sensitive, receive the unforeseen, and Hauska becomes not only a seal over the past, but a mirror turned unsettlingly toward the future. Chapter 6. Noble Inheritance. Carriages labor up the steep forest track in the spring of 1823, wheels sinking into mud as porters unload crates of tiles, lime, and scaffolding timber. Inside the courtyard, Count Franz von Kunik walks the uneven floors with his architect, pausing where cracks spider across the chapel vault, faint but widening. Voices echo softly. Repair the roofs, stabilize the frescoes, restore dignity to a seat held by the family since the early 1700s. Yet no one proposes sinking a well, expanding living quarters, or altering the inward-facing defenses. Why commit fresh capital to preservation when the castle has long served more as obligation than home? The Kunik family, elevated to princely status in 1769, had acquired Hauska through marriage alliances in the complicated web of Bohemian nobility. By 1823, with the Renaissance embellishments fading and roofs leaking onto priceless murals, the decision fell to them: undertake measured restoration or allow slow collapse. Work focused on essentials: new roofing over the main hall, careful cleaning of the chapel frescoes, reinforcement of the tower without changing its silhouette. The sealed floor beneath the altar remained untouched, as did the fake windows and odd arrow slits. Consequences arrived without announcement. The renovations bought decades of structural life, yet the castle stayed peripheral to the family's main residences in Prague and Vienna. Visits remained ceremonial, brief, daily life never took root. By the late 19th century, records show it used occasionally for hunting parties, more often left to a caretaker and silence. Ownership endured, but habitation did not. Rationally, the choice reflected aristocratic duty: maintain ancestral holdings as symbols of continuity, especially after the Napoleonic upheavals that threatened confiscation of neglected estates. Investment preserved legal claim and cultural prestige in an era when nobility justified its status through heritage. But the contradiction lies in selective restraint. Why repair surfaces yet refuse deeper correction? Why reinforce walls that still point defenses inward, or leave water supply dependent on aging cisterns when nearby springs could have been tapped? Why spend on fresco conservation while ignoring the persistent reports of footsteps in empty corridors noted even in family correspondence? The chain lengthens. Inherit burden, restore selectively, and the anomalies sharpen rather than fade. Over 545 years had elapsed from the original build when the 1823 works began. The König family held title for approximately 145 years across branches. Restoration costs remain unlisted precisely, but paralleled sums of 4,000–6,000 florins spent on comparable Bohemian seats. The chapel frescoes cover roughly 60 square meters across walls and vault. Tower height stabilized at 20 meters. Documented ownership transfers within the family numbered at least 4 in that century. Intervals between recorded noble visits averaged 8 to 12 years. No fatalities listed in renovation logs, yet local accounts mention 2 workers lost to falls in the courtyard over the decades. A withheld explanation hovers in the family archives. Letters discuss cracks and leaks, yet never propose relocation of the altar or exploration beneath it. Moral discomfort gathers in the quiet expenditure. Funds directed to appearance while practicality languished, caretakers left in isolation for months. Quiet contradiction deepens. The castle emerges more intact, yet no more livable, its restored elegance only heightening the sense that something essential was always left unrepaired. Thus the inheritance binds another inevitable turn, not to transform the inconvenient into the useful, nor to release it entirely, but to conserve the discomfort itself. Passing Hauska forward is a question wrapped carefully in fresh stone and paint. Chapter 7. Industrial Acquisition. Ink dries on a contract in a Prague notary office on a winter day in 1924. Joseph Simonek, president of the Škoda Works, signs his name beneath the faded crest of the König family, acquiring Hauska Castle for a sum recorded as 100,000 Czechoslovak crowns. Weeks later, he stands alone in the courtyard, breath visible in the cold air, gazing up at the patched roofs and blank-eyed fake windows. The estate has lain semi-derelict for decades. Caretakers report doors opening by themselves, footsteps on upper floors when no one is present. Yet no clause in the sale demands explanation or remedy. Why would a modern industrialist, architect of automobiles and artillery, purchase a remote, inconvenient ruin in the newly formed republic. Simonek's rise mirrored Czechoslovakia's own, from engineer to magnate in the interwar boom. Houska appealed not as residence. His family maintained homes in Plzeň and Prague, but as retreat and curiosity. Records show modest plans. Repair the most urgent leaks, install basic electricity, clear overgrown paths. Between 1924 and 1939 the castle saw sporadic occupation, weekend hunting parties, summer visits by Simonek's children, never prolonged stays. Workmen came and went, uncovering sealed passages behind the chapel, finding bones described in private notes as not entirely human, though never publicly displayed. Consequences arrived gradually. The purchase stabilized ownership after centuries of noble drift, yet introduced new disturbances. Renovations in the 1930s disturbed layers untouched since the Renaissance, dislodging dust that carried faint, unexplained odors. Family accounts speak of tools misplaced overnight, lights failing in specific corridors. By 1939, with German troops approaching, Simonek fled abroad. The castle passed briefly to his heirs before wartime seizure. Rationally, the acquisition reflected a pattern among interwar industrialists, buying historic estates for prestige, tax advantage, or simply the romance of owning a piece of Bohemia's past. The price, though substantial, was modest for a man of Simonek's wealth. The remoteness offered escape from industrial noise and political tension. But the contradiction rests in restraint. Why acquire title yet invest so selectively? Why clear passages only to brick some up again, according to worker testimony? Why retain the inward defenses, the sealed chapel floor, the cisterns alone for water, when modern engineering could have resolved every practical flaw? Why, in family correspondence, does the castle appear less as pleasure than obligation, visits cut short by unease never fully articulated? The chain tightens. Buy as curiosity, disturb what sleeps, and the questions multiply rather than resolve. Over 646 years separated the original construction from Simonek's purchase. He owned the castle for 15 years before exile. The sale price of 100,000 crowns equated roughly to the cost of 20 luxury automobiles in 1924. Renovations between 1924 and 1939 employed up to 30 local workers seasonally. The main building footprint covers 0.5 hectares. Underground passages explored totaled at least 50 meters before resealing. Documented stays by the family averaged 10 to 15 days per year. No official deaths recorded, yet 2 workmen reportedly refused to return after finding bones in 1933. A withheld explanation lingers in the absence of photographs. Simonek, an avid documenter of factories and machines, left almost no images of Houska's interior works. Moral discomfort gathers in the disturbance. Modern tools prying at medieval seals, bones removed without archaeological note. Quiet contradiction deepens. The castle gains its first owner equipped to master it fully, yet emerges no less enigmatic, its new caretaker fleeing not decay but something less nameable. Thus the industrial acquisition forges the next inevitable link, not to rationalize the irrational, nor to abandon the burdensome, but to stir the sediment and pass the clouded vessel forward, ensuring Houska would face the century's darkest hours already unsettled from within. Chapter 8. Wartime Seizure. Truck engines rumble through the forest in the autumn of 1939, headlights cutting narrow paths as German troops secure the gates of Houska. Officers unload crates marked with official seals. Books, manuscripts, documents, stacked carefully in the dim halls while sentries take positions at the inward-facing slits. Locals, Watching from distant ridges, note the absence of heavy fortifications or supply convoys typical of strategic posts. No prisoners arrive in numbers, no visible construction alters the silhouette. Yet lights burn late into nights, and muffled sounds carry on the wind. What purpose could a remote, indefensible castle serve in the machinery of occupation? The seizure followed the incorporation of the Sudetenland and the full protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Hauska, private property of the Simonich family since 1924, fell under Wehrmacht control by 1939, with documented use escalating around 1943 as a depository for confiscated materials, primarily books and archives from Jewish and Masonic collections, routed through concentration camp systems to secure storage far from bombing threats. Consequences extended beyond logistics. The occupation lasted until 1945. Retreating forces left minimal traces, records destroyed or removed. Post-war, the castle passed to state control in 1948, housing library archives until the 1990s. Renovations in later decades uncovered anomalies. Skeletal remains in the courtyard, reportedly of 3 German soldiers in uniform, execution-style wounds suggested but unconfirmed in official reports. Rationally, the site offered isolation for safeguarding valuable plundered materials. Thousands of volumes, including occult texts from Himmler's collections, stored away from Allied advances. Remoteness deterred sabotage. The existing structure required no new build. But the contradiction lingers in local memory. Why select a place of no military value, 47 kilometers from Prague, when fortified depots existed nearer rail lines? Why reports of strange nocturnal activity, lights flickering in the chapel, when mere storage demanded no such vigilance? Why the discovered skeletons, if retreat proceeded orderly? The chain constricts. Occupy for safekeeping, yet invite speculation that endures, binding the castle tighter to its older shadows. Over 661 years separated the original construction from the 1939 seizure. Occupation spanned exactly 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. Depository use intensified in 1943. Estimated volumes stored reached into the thousands, part of broader confiscations exceeding 13,000 occult-related items across SS networks. The courtyard measures roughly 30 by 20 meters. Post-war gaps in documentation span decades. No confirmed prisoner deaths on site, yet legends and accounts cite 3 skeletal remains of executed German personnel found during 1990s works. A withheld explanation rests in the destroyed records. What inventories listed, what personnel oversaw. Moral discomfort accumulates in the crates. Origins. Cultural theft, lives erased upstream. Quiet contradiction persists. A fortress of paper and stone, secured against the world, yet unable to secure its own secrets from the questions that followed. Thus the wartime decision forges the inevitable next. Not to conquer new ground, but to hide within old mysteries, ensuring that liberation would reveal less than it concealed, and Hauska would carry forward echoes not only medieval, but unmistakably modern. Chapter 9. Modern Custody. Flashbulbs pop in the courtyard on a crisp morning in 1999 as the Simonich heirs cut a ribbon across the newly restored gate. Tour groups follow close behind. Families, schoolchildren, skeptics with notebooks, stepping carefully over the chapel floor where guides pause longer than necessary. Brochures promise Gothic frescoes, Renaissance illusions, and legends of the gateway, but no one mentions sealing off certain passages again after brief exploration. Lights now illuminate the halls steadily. A small cafe occupies what was once a guardroom. Yet visitors linger at the edges, voices lowering near the altar. Why, after centuries of seclusion and state control, open the doors wide to the public, and why do some doors remain quietly closed? The return came gradually. Following the Velvet Revolution of 1989, the castle, nationalized in 1948 and used as a state archive depot, passed back to the Simonnik family in 1991 through restitution. Renovations began in earnest in the mid-1990s. Roofs fully replaced, electricity modernized, the chapel frescoes conserved professionally for the first time since the 19th century. Underground corridors, briefly probed during earlier works, were mapped, then partially bricked up, for safety. Public opening followed in 1999, with guided tours emphasizing history over hauntings, though the Peklum Hell exhibit, a stylized pit display, draws the longest queues. Consequences have been measured but persistent. Annual visitors rose steadily, sustaining maintenance in a way private ownership never could. Yet reports continue. Cameras malfunctioning in the chapel, footsteps recorded on audio tours when groups stand still, sudden drops in temperature near the altar. Guides mention these only if pressed. Official materials frame them as folklore. Certain lower levels remain off limits, cited as structurally unsound despite modern reinforcement elsewhere. Rationally, the decision aligns with post-communist realities. Tourism is economic lifeline for returned properties, cultural heritage laws encouraging access, the castle's isolation now an asset rather than liability in an age of day trippers from Prague. Opening preserved the building where closure might have invited decay. But the contradiction sits in the half measures. Why invest millions in restoration yet restrict full access? Why allow public exploration of the courtyard and chapel while sealing passages explored only decades earlier? Why do visitor logs and online accounts consistently note the same phenomena? Cars stalling on the approach road, apparitions in peripheral vision, when modern lighting and crowds should dispel older shadows. The chain completes its latest turn. Return to private hands, open to scrutiny, and the questions neither vanish nor resolve. Over 721 years separated the original construction from the 1999 public opening. State control lasted 41 years from 1948. Restitution occurred in 1991 after 2 years of legal process. Renovations in the 1990s cost an estimated 20 to 30 million Czech koruna. Annual visitors now exceed 20,000. The restricted underground network spans at least 100 meters per partial surveys. Documented ownership stability since 1991 marks the longest private continuity in 2 centuries. No verified deaths since opening, yet emergency calls for fainting or panic average 4 to 6 per season. A withheld explanation rests in the guides. Brief pauses, trained to narrate history, yet aware of what draws the crowds. Moral discomfort gathers in the transaction. A sight of layered unease packaged for consumption, mysteries marketed rather than muted. Quiet contradiction endures. The castle stands more visited than ever, more documented, more explained, yet no less withheld, its most persistent silences now preserved behind velvet ropes and timed tickets. Thus the modern custody forges the final visible link, not to dispel the accumulated weight of decisions past, nor to conceal it entirely, but to display the unresolved in daylight, ensuring that Hauska remains, inevitably, a place where every answer given only sharpens the question left unasked. Chapter 10. The Present Silence. A thin layer of frost coats the chapel floor on a winter morning in late 2025. The last tour group of the season has departed hours earlier. The guide locks the gate with a practiced turn, footsteps crunching down the path toward the parking lot where engines start reluctantly in the cold. Inside, the castle settles into its off-season quiet, lights switched off corridor by corridor, only the faint hum of a security camera remains. Displays in the peculum exhibit stand dark, the stylized pit frozen mid-glow. No voices echo in the courtyard, wind moves through the fake windows without resistance. Yet the structure breathes, almost imperceptibly, stone expanding and contracting with temperature, cracks widening by fractions of millimeters each year. Why, after nearly 8 centuries of decisions to build, seal, revise, occupy, and finally expose, does Hauska still feel less like a resolved monument than a held breath? The current custody, private ownership by the Simonich heirs, managed as a cultural site, has stabilized since the 1999 opening. Maintenance follows a predictable cycle: annual inspections, targeted repairs to the tower and roofs, conservation of frescoes funded partly by ticket revenue. Drone surveys in 2023 mapped the surrounding karst for stability. Ground-penetrating radar in 2024 traced voids beneath the chapel without recommendation to excavate. Access remains partial. Upper floors and courtyard open, certain lower passages closed indefinitely, cited as unsafe limestone cavities. Visitor numbers plateau at 25,000–30,000 annually, enough to sustain but not overwhelm. Consequences arrive now in subtler forms. Online forums and short videos circulate the same recurring accounts. Electronic voice phenomena captured on quiet tours, shadows in photographs where no one stood, unexplained battery drain in the chapel. Scientific teams, acoustic engineers, geologists, visit sporadically, publish measured reports attributing sounds to wind tunnels and temperature shifts, yet leave without altering the restricted zones. The castle endures as neither fully explained nor fully mysterious, its management content to preserve the balance. Rationally, the present stance reflects pragmatic heritage stewardship: protect the fabric, generate modest income, comply with Czech monument laws requiring public benefit for tax relief. Full excavation or modernization would risk collapse or irreversible change. Partial mystery sustains interest where pure history might not. But the contradiction rests in the quiet acceptance: why reinforce every surface flaw except the core ones? Why map the voids yet decline to probe them, when technology exists that medieval builders could not imagine? Why allow the narrative of containment to persist in brochures and guides, when rational surveys find only geology? Why, in ownership records spanning 746 years from the first stones to 2025, has no one ever chosen to break the pattern decisively, to fill the pit, to redirect the defenses outward, to inhabit without reservation? Over 746 years have passed since the mid-1270s foundation. Public access has lasted 26 years as of 2025. Annual maintenance costs hover near 5 to 7 million Czech koruna. Visitor counts average 28,000 in recent seasons. Restricted underground voids extend an estimated 150 meters per radar data. Structural monitoring records 12 microfractures annually in the chapel vault. Documented ownership changes total 14 major transfers. No fatalities since opening, yet medical incidents, faintings, anxiety attacks, average 8 per year. A withheld explanation lingers in the management's restraint. No public statement ever advocates full disclosure or demolition of myth. Moral discomfort gathers in the equilibrium, a site, preserved not despite its unease, but partly through it, questions curated rather than answered. Quiet contradiction settles deepest here. The castle stands more secure, more studied, more visited than at any point in its history. Yet the essential silence beneath the chapel floor remains undisturbed, as if every decision, from the first stone laid to the last ticket sold, has only ever served to extend that single, unbroken pause. Thus the chain reaches its present link, not conclusion, but continuation. Each choice, rational in its moment, has rendered alternatives impossible, ensuring that Hauska endures not as resolved past, but as ongoing question. If every layer added, stone, fresco, renovation, to her script, has only deepened the seal, was the void ever truly below the chapel, or has it always been the space between what was decided and what was never quite confronted?